People were walking down the busy street when it happened. A sudden slap, loud and sharp, cracked through the air. Heads turned instantly, conversations froze, and every eye fell on the shocking scene. A policeman, in full uniform, had just slapped a young woman in the middle of the street. Gasps spread like wildfire, and whispers began, some in disbelief, some in fear. But what no one knew yet, not even the officer himself, was that this normal girl he thought he could humiliate was anything but ordinary. And what would unfold next would turn the entire situation upside down. Her name was Maya. To the outside world, she looked like any young woman in her 20s, modest clothes, calm expression, walking quietly with her shopping bag. But beneath that ordinary appearance, she carried a story, a strength, and a role that most people could never imagine. The officer who struck her, a man named Daniels, had no idea he was seconds away from rewriting his own career and reputation with that single act of arrogance. Daniels wasn't new to abuse of power. He was one of those cops who thrived on intimidation. Known for yelling at street vendors, pushing around the homeless, and threatening teenagers for fun, he had built himself a reputation of fear. And today, when Maya didn't immediately step aside to clear the path, he saw her as just another nobody he could control. He barked at her to move faster. When she didn't react the way he wanted, his hand flew across her face before his brain had even caught up with his action. The crowd was stunned into silence at first. But then murmurs started. Phones came out of pockets. Cameras began recording. A child asked her mother in a loud, confused voice, "Why did the policeman hit her?" The woman pulled her child closer, whispering nervously, "Don't look. Don't get involved." That was the problem. People had seen Daniels act like this before, but most stayed silent out of fear. Maya, however, did not cower. She did not cry. She slowly turned her face back to him, her cheek red from the slap, her eyes burning not with tears but with something else, calm fury. That silence, that strength, was more terrifying to Daniels than if she had screamed. He expected her to break down, to apologize, to plead, but she just looked at him as if weighing his very soul. "Do you know who I am?" She finally asked, her voice steady, not trembling. Daniel smirked, scoffing at her calmness. "You're nobody. Just another girl who forgot her place." The crowd collectively drew in a breath at his arrogance. A few brave voices from the back shouted, "That's not right. You can't do that." But Daniel silenced them with a glare. He puffed out his chest, tightening his grip on his belt, convinced he still held the upper hand. What he didn't realize was that this was the moment his entire world was about to shift. Maya slowly reached into her bag, and Daniels instinctively stiffened, ready to accuse her of something, anything to justify his assault. But what she pulled out was not a weapon. It was a small black leather wallet. She flipped it open, and the gold badge inside gleamed in the sunlight. The crowd gasped again, this time louder. Whispers rippled through like electricity. She's law enforcement? Oh my God, she's not just a random girl." Daniels blinked, stepping back in disbelief. His face drained of color as the realization hit him. He hadn't just slapped some ordinary woman, he had just assaulted an undercover federal agent. And that was only the beginning. Daniels stumbled back, his arrogant smirk evaporating the second his eyes locked on the badge. For a moment, the street was silent, except for the distant hum of traffic. Then, like a storm gathering force, the crowd's murmurs swelled into outrage. "Hit an agent. He's finished. This is going online." Cameras zoomed closer, hands held high to capture every angle of the unfolding disaster. Maya didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her calmness carried more authority than his shouting ever could. "Officer Daniels," she said, deliberately emphasizing his name. "You've just struck a federal agent in broad daylight without cause, and in front of dozens of witnesses." Daniel's throat went dry. He glanced around, desperately searching for someone, anyone to back him up. His partner, standing a few steps away, froze like a statue. He had seen Daniels get away with bullying before, but this time there was no escaping the truth. His partner's eyes shifted toward the phones, recording everything. He wasn't about to lose his career for Daniel's arrogance. Maya snapped her badge shut and slipped it back into her bag, then turned her full gaze on him. "Do you know how many people you've humiliated like this? How many lives you've made miserable because you think the uniform makes you untouchable?" Her words weren't just for him, they were for the crowd, for the cameras, for every person who had suffered silently. Daniels tried to recover. "She's lying," he shouted, pointing at her. "That can't be real. She's just pretending to." But before he could finish, Maya pulled out her phone, tapped a button, and within seconds, a voice crackled through a secure line. "Agent Maya confirmed status." The sound hit him like a brick. She wasn't bluffing. The crowd exploded in gasps. Some even cheered. His face turned crimson as sweat gathered at his temples. For the first time in years, Daniels wasn't the predator, he was prey. "You've crossed a line," Maya continued, her voice cutting like a blade. "And this time, there's no sweeping it under the rug." She looked around at the people filming. "Don't stop recording. Let the truth be seen. This isn't just about Emmett, it's about every person this man has abused." The crowd erupted in support. People shouted "yes" and "justice." Daniels backed up, his voice cracking. I didn't know." "I thought that's the problem," Maya cut in sharply. "You thought I was just a girl you could intimidate. You thought no one would fight back. But now the entire city will see exactly who you are." The twist hung heavy in the air. A man who once thrived on power now stood exposed, trembling as the world watched. Daniel's career, his authority, his false sense of control, everything was unraveling in front of him. But Maya wasn't finished. She knew this wasn't just about one slap. This was about accountability, about showing every onlooker that silence was no longer an option, and she was prepared to take it all the way. The scene grew heavier by the second. The crowd wasn't just angry anymore, they were hungry for justice. Phones stayed up, recording every bead of sweat rolling down Daniel's face. His arrogance had dissolved into panic, and that was something the people had been waiting to see. Maya stepped forward, her presence unshakable. "You think this is the first time you've been caught?" "Daniels?" she asked, her voice low but cutting. "I've been investigating you for months. Complaints, reports, testimonies, all swept under the rug. How many times did you think you could get away with it?" The officer's mouth opened, but no words came out. He stuttered, glanced at his partner for help, but the man looked away. Nobody wanted to stand beside him now. The crowd leaned in closer, sensing something big. "Wait, investigating," someone whispered. Another voice shouted, "She's been on to him this whole time." Gasps rippled through the group. Daniel shook his head violently. No, you can't. This isn't—" He tried to speak louder, but his voice cracked under the pressure. Maya didn't flinch. She pulled a small recorder from her bag and clicked play. Daniel's own voice spilled into the air. "Who's going to believe you, huh? I'm the law here." The words echoed like thunder across the street. The crowd erupted in outrage, some people yelling curses, others chanting for him to be arrested on the spot. Daniel's face drained of all color. He looked like a man watching the ground vanish beneath him. "You abused your badge to silence people," Maya said, her tone sharp and unforgiving. "But today that silence is broken. Everyone sees you for what you really are." The twist sent a jolt through the crowd. Daniels wasn't just guilty of a slap in the street, he was guilty of years of corruption. People who had once felt powerless now felt a spark of hope ignite. They cheered for Maya, some even chanting her name. Daniels stumbled backward, his voice barely a whisper. "Please, don't do this. I have a family, a career." "And how many families did you ruin when you abused your power?" Maya fired back. "How many lives did you shatter without a second thought?" The moment was unbearable for Daniels. His swagger, his control, his mask on, and standing in his place was a man stripped bare, trembling, while the truth closed in like a storm. But Maya wasn't done yet. She hadn't just come here to expose him. She had come to make sure this ended once and for all. And the crowd, now firmly on her side, wasn't going anywhere until justice was served. Daniel's knees buckled, and for a brief moment, he looked like a man about to collapse. The crowd wasn't letting him slip away this time. A chant started from somewhere in the back. "Justice. Justice." It spread like fire, voices rising in unison, shaking the air with their demand. Maya stood tall, her eyes never leaving Daniel's. She could feel the weight of history pressing down years of people silenced, beaten, or humiliated by those meant to protect them. Tonight, that chain was breaking. Daniels tried one last desperate move. He lunged for Maya, his hand outstretched to grab her arm and snatch the recorder. But the crowd roared. People surged forward, blocking him with their bodies. Several men and women pushed him back, and for the first time, Daniels found himself trapped not by rules or laws, but by the people he once lorded over. Maya raised her voice above the noise. "This ends here. No more hiding. No more excuses." She dialed a number on her phone and held it up for everyone to hear. "This call is going straight to internal affairs. With all of you as witnesses, Daniels will finally face the consequences." Daniels' face twisted into rage and fear all at once. You can't do this to me. I am the law." "No," Maya said firmly, her voice cutting through the shouting like a blade. "The law is bigger than you. And tonight, it belongs to the people you tried to break." The crowd erupted into cheers so loud it drowned out Daniels' protests. Some cried. Others held their phones higher, capturing the exact moment the balance of power shifted. A man who had terrorized them for years now stood shaking, cornered, and utterly powerless. Daniels dropped to his knees, his voice breaking. "Please, I'll lose everything. My job, my pension, my family." Maya's eyes softened for a moment. "But only for a moment. You should have thought about that before you decided other people's families didn't matter." Blue and red lights flickered in the distance, sirens wailing closer. This time they weren't coming to protect Daniels, they were coming to take him away. The crowd parted like a tide, clearing the street for the incoming patrol cars. Daniels looked up at Maya one last time, his face twisted in despair. "You'll regret this." But Maya stood tall, her voice steady. "No, the only regret here is yours, and the world will see why." The police cars screeched to a stop, officers spilling out. When they saw Daniels on his knees and the crowd pointing at him, they knew this was on T. Just another report it was the end of a corrupt officer's reign. The cuffs snapped around his wrists, and for the first time in years, the neighborhood felt the weight of fear lift off their shoulders. People clapped, shouted, even embraced one another. They weren't just witnessing an arrest, they were witnessing change. Maya looked around at the crowd, her heart swelling. She hadn't just stood up for herself, she had stood up for everyone. And as the sirens faded into the night, the people knew this wasn't the end. This was the beginning of something bigger. When the dust finally settled, Maya stood in the middle of the street, surrounded by neighbors who looked at her not just as a young woman, but as a symbol of strength they had long forgotten they had. One older man, his hands trembling, reached out and touched her arm. "You gave us our voices back," he whispered. Tears pooled in his eyes, and Maya felt her chest tighten with a mix of pride and relief. In that moment, she realized it wasn't just about Daniels, or the slap, or even the fight for her own dignity. It was about all of them, the mothers who had warned their children to keep their heads down, the fathers who'd swallowed anger to avoid being targeted, the kids who had grown up thinking fear was normal. Tonight, all of that cracked wide open. The crowd began to disperse slowly, but their energy lingered in the air like an unspoken promise. Things were never going back to the way they were. Daniels had been taken away, but his downfall wasn't the ending. It was just the spark. Maya knew there would be trials, hearings, maybe even threats. But she also knew something else. She wasn't alone anymore. She walked home with her head high, every step feeling lighter than the last. Her phone buzzed nonstop with messages, friends, journalists, even strangers across the city, all thanking her for being brave enough to do what they wished they could. Her video was already spreading like wildfire online, the comments flooding in with outraged support. One resounding theme: enough is enough. Later that night, sitting by her window, Maya whispered to herself, "We did it." She wasn't speaking only to herself, she was speaking to everyone who had stood beside her, who had shouted, who had refused to look away. And for the first time in a long time, she believed change was possible. If you're watching this, remember silence protects the oppressor, but courage protects the people. Stand up, speak out, and never let fear decide your future. And if this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it, because sometimes one voice is all it takes to spark a revolution.